Today, we're going to recap a 2005 horror movie titled Amityville Horror, based on a true story. The movie begins with flashes of lightning and a young man hypnotized by weird symbols on the TV. A creepy voice keeps saying, and soon, the radio clock beside the man reads 3:15. Immediately, the young man loads a gun and climbs upstairs, where his family members slept. One by one, he shoots them in their sleep and then proceeds to his baby sister as she is hiding in her closet. Before he shoots her, he
I
says,
love you, Jody.
in the next scene, there is news coverage of the shooting, and the young man is being carted off to jail. 1 year later, it looks like the town has recovered from the horror, and we see a happy couple, Katerine and her second husband, George. They're having a good time when Michael, Kathy's youngest son, interrupts them wearing a whatever that is. Michael then gets on the bed while Kathy leaves to get dressed. He asks George if he knew his late father, and George replies that he didn't. Now, we see Billy, Kathy's oldest son, and Chelsea, her daughter, seated at the dining table, waiting for breakfast. George makes omelets that look gross, and yeah, Billy confirms it. He is also arguing with his parents to stop picking him up from school because he is too big for that. Then Kathy and George set out to hunt for a new house, and they come across a house whose value on the market is unbelievably low. An agent, Eden, is already waiting for them in front of the house. Kathy runs out of the car to meet Eden, and George follows suit. They enter the house, and Kathy notices a dark stain at the edge of the ceiling, but she quickly dismisses it. Who wouldn't, when the place is almost free? George, on the other hand, isn't so sure about the house, but he is impressed when he notices that the house has a boathouse. Well, he has a boat too. Won't be a bad place. As they move from room to room, Eden hears a strange sound coming from the vent behind her. Scared, she looks back but quickly turns her attention back to her clients. Eden shows the couple the basement but doesn't go in with them. In the basement, George notices and picks up the radio clock from the first scene but puts it back and leaves the basement with his wife. George and Kathy finally agree to buy the house. But as they leave the front door, George cannot help but ask why the house is so cheap. Eden reveals that a man killed his entire family in the house a year ago. However, she says the town has moved on. Kathy becomes skeptical, and George assures her that,
Well, houses don't kill people. People kill people.
the family moved into the house, recording happy moments as they settled in. At night, Kathy tucks the boys in bed, asking Michael if he has said his prayers. Billy interrupts, angry that there is no one to pray to, or his father wouldn't have died. Kathy tries to soothe his anger while George eavesdrops from the door. Before George and Kathy settle in bed, George gets uncomfortably cold. He decides to add some more kindling to the fire in the basement. While doing so, he hears a frightening sound from the vent and radio clock. But he shrugs off the sound when he notices that the radio clock is disconnected from power. Later, he gets intimate with his wife. But while they're in the act, he sees Jody hanging at the foot of their bed as though she is being strangled. This makes him lose interest in intimacy. What a pleasant housewarming surprise. The next day, everyone is outside, but when Kathy comes in with the laundry, she can hear Chelsea talking to someone upstairs. Kathy goes upstairs to Chelsea's room, and Jody is sitting in a chair opposite Chelsea's bed, but Kathy doesn't see her. When Kathy asks, the young girl says she's talking to Jody. Her mother immediately assumes Jody is an imaginary friend. Kathy also asks who is in the drawing in Chelsea's book, but Chelsea looks at Jody, signaling her not to tell. Kathy looks back but doesn't see anything. In the following scene, George is chopping wood for the fireplace when Michael runs to him, playing with a metal harness. When Michael mentions that he found the object in the basement, George scolds him that the basement is his office. At the same time, Kathy returns from shopping, and as she unpacks her grocery bag, they realize that Chelsea is missing. After a few freaking moments of searching and calling out for the girl, they find her standing on the boat in the boathouse, hypnotized and holding a red balloon. When asked, Chelsea says Jody wanted to see the water, and Kathy blames George for letting the little girl out of his sight in the first place. Amused, George locks the boathouse, and they all go inside. At night, Michael wakes up and wants to use the restroom. He tries to wake Billy, but when his older brother doesn't budge, he goes all alone. At the passage, Michael notices the boathouse door swinging open and makes a beeline for the restroom. He relieves himself while his eyes remain fixed on the door. Afterward, he tried to turn on the water to wash his hands, but nothing happens. Just then, a creepy man appears behind him, and blood starts to flow from the tap, making the young lad run back to his room and hide under the covers. Later that night, George is awakened by a strange sound and chairs moving by themselves. He goes upstairs to check on the boys, only to find a zombie version of himself shooting the children. Thank God it was all a dream, because George now truly wakes up to find the boathouse door open and a red balloon flying out of it. He panics, thinking Chelsea is at the boathouse again. He runs to the boathouse and dives into the water when he sees bubbles forming in it. But he finds no one. He then leaves the boathouse to stop the dog Harry from barking. Then he sees Jody and Chelsea staring at him from Chelsea's window. He runs into the house to find Chelsea sleeping peacefully. He picks up Jody's plush bear to place it on Chelsea's side but doesn't see the creepy hands holding Jody hostage on the roof. George goes to the basement to find Harry digging a hole near a wall. He chases the dog out, and Kathy comes to take him back to bed. But George angrily tells her to stop treating him like one of her children. He confirms that he found the key to the boathouse in Billy's room. The next morning, as George and Billy return from gathering kindling for the fireplace, George tries to make Billy apologize for opening the boathouse, but Billy wouldn't because he didn't do it. As a result, George leaves Billy to unload the truck by himself. While in the kitchen, Kathy senses a dark figure run past her. When she looks back, she finds the colorful magnetic alphabet on the refrigerator door arranged to form. Later that night, George and Kathy have a date and decide to get a babysitter for the kids. Billy protests that they do not need a babysitter, but the 12-year-old becomes dumbfounded as soon as the attractive babysitter arrives. "I wouldn't leave my 12-year-old kid to a babysitter dressed like that. I don't know about you." George admits feeling better at the restaurant because he's left the house, and their dinner soon turns romantic. Back at the house, the babysitter tells Billy about the former occupants of the house and how Ronnie killed his family on the beds Billy and his family now sleep in. Everyone is engrossed in the story, and they do not notice strange things currently happening in the house. Later, Billy dares the babysitter to go into Jody's closet in return for a painting in his room. She agreed, but Chelsea warned that she would make Jody angry. The babysitter doesn't listen and mocks Jody, saying she lost her job because of the girl. The babysitter goes into the closet, and the door swings shut. She thinks it is all a prank until weird things start to happen, and Jody appears and makes her dip a finger into the bullet wound in her head. This sends the babysitter into shock as George and Kathy return. Angry, George scolds the boys for pulling a prank on the babysitter. They try to tell him that the house is terrible, but he sends them upstairs. Kathy is in Chelsea's room, and the creepy little girl tells her mother that the babysitter upset Jody, and Jody hurt her. She also says Jody thinks the man in the house is evil and needs to leave. In the following scene, George, who is now acting strangely, hears from that wall in the basement as he nails some wood on the wall. He leans on the wall to hear better but finds himself lying in a strange room on the other side of the wall with a cut through his back. Another bad dream. George wakes up and starts vomiting. He washes his face and decides to dip himself in a warm bath. Immediately he gets into the water, he gets pulled down by bloody hands, and is about to drown when Kathy comes in to pull him out. He is totally creeped out. In the next scene, George goes to see a doctor. After checking him and confirming that he is fine physically, the doctor refers him to a psychiatrist. But George jokes it off and goes home with Kathy. As soon as George alights from the car at home, he notices Chelsea's plush bear fall from above. When he and Kathy look up, they find Chelsea playing and waving on the roof. Surprisingly, she isn't scared one bit. Geez. Kathy makes her way to the roof from inside the house while George gets a ladder to reach the girl from outside. As soon as Kathy comes close to her daughter on the roof, the little girl jumps off but is miraculously caught by Kathy and then George. In the house, Kathy scolds Chelsea for her behavior, but the girl protests that Jody is real and wanted to her to be with her late father forever and ever. She confesses to having seen Jody. Just then, George walks past, holding the plush bear, and is clearly fed up with the family's attitude. He later moves his things to the basement. The next day, disturbed Kathy goes to the Reverend to explain what was happening in her family. The Reverend Father recalls that a family once suffered what her family was going through. Kathy reveals that her family lives in the same house that the family lived in. Back at home, George now has bloody eyes and a spooky gaze. He makes Billy hold a log of kindling while he hacks down on the log. Later that night, George cuddles on the couch in the basement, watching the video they made the day they moved into the house. He gets emotional and starts to laugh until he sees Billy's face turn into that of a demon. He soon sleeps off but is startled when the radio clock reads 3:15. Harry starts barking in the boathouse, and the doors and windows swing open. He rushes to the boathouse but sees nothing. Soon, a demonic figure jumps at him from behind, and he swings his axe, killing it instantly. Unfortunately, the figure is Harry, and George cries seeing what he has done. But he takes care of the animal's body and wipes the blood off the boathouse. In the morning, Kathy meets an almost mummified George in the kitchen and tries to explain that they should leave the house. George mocks her and says they're not going anywhere because all their money is in the house. He starts to feel cold and reaches for the stove when Kathy starts yelling at him to leave the stove. Billy and Michael interrupt their argument asking if George has seen Harry. But George says Harry must have run away. Soon enough, the Reverend visits and starts to anoint the house while Spooky George drills nails halfway through the windows. Kathy takes a walk with the father, where he reveals to a stunned Kathy that Chelsea's plush bear was buried with Jodie DeFee. The father begins to pray in a room in the house, and the floor sizzles whenever he pours holy water. The door swings shut, and he is attacked by a swarm of flies from the vent. Kathy tries to stop the father as he drives off without saying a single word to her. Then George creeps up on her, telling her,
It's okay. I'm here.
At night, George rouses from sleep because of Harry's barking. It is now day 28. And Kathy, already sick of everything happening, goes to the library to research the house. What she finds is bone-chilling. An evil cult leader killed himself in the house so that his spirit could live in the house forever. At home, George finally breaks through the wall in the basement to find some disturbing stuff, including the cult leader Jeremiah Ketchum who killed himself in the house. Kathy drives from the library to the church, where she confronts the revered father about his sudden departure. He explains that the house scares him and Kathy should take her family away from there. On her way home, Kathy tries to call George to tell him to leave with the kids, but George smashes the phone. Kathy returns home and starts calling for her children. She goes to the boathouse for George but falls into the water when he flashes a torchlight at her. She tries to swim out, but her hair is caught in the rudder as George turns on the boat. When he goes to check on Kathy, George thinks she is a demon and does nothing. As soon as Kathy frees herself, she runs away from George and into the house, where she meets Chelsea screaming in shock after seeing 4 coffins with their names on them. As mother and child try to escape, George stops them, asking what their problem is. The house also seems to cooperate with whatever is controlling George. All windows and doors shut themselves as soon as Kathy and her children go close to them. With a heavy downpour and flashes of lightning, the family decides to escape through the roof. But George fires a rifle at them from the house and catches up with them. Billy knocks George out by hitting home with a pipe, but not for long. George soon gets up and tries to hack Billy with his axe. Before he does, Kathy knocks him out again with the rifle, but he soon gets up and stabs her with the axe. Okay, that was just unconscious George's vision. George really wakes up now and tells Kathy to kill him so he won't have to kill her. But Kathy knocks him out again and drags him to the boathouse. George sees a quick flash of their lives before his possession in the house, and the entire family speeds off in the boat. He wakes up moments later, and the family is relieved to see that he is himself again when he says, "Don't even look at it, Kathy, let's get out of here." In the final scene, we see everything returning to normal in the house as Jodie is pulled into the ground by strange hands. Looks like houses kill people after all. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more recaps like this.